Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon and welcome to this Friday, August 23rd edition of Guadalupe Valley Views. I'm Egan Barthels. It's always a pleasure when we get to sit down and talk with this gentleman. He's the singing weatherman and more. Bill Hecke is on the line. Hey, Bill, how are you today, buddy?
Oh, I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm doing good, and it's always a pleasure to catch up with you when we can. We always like to give you an opportunity to say hi to the old neighborhood. And
you bet.
So, Bill, I appreciate you taking time out of your schedule to join us on this week's show.
Oh, I'll tell you what, Egan, anytime you have time for me, I have time for you. Yeah. I'm that kind of guy.
I knew you were. And we have, there's some times that I miss us being on the radio each weekday morning, but it is always fun when we get to catch up when we can, especially and have our neighbors join us here listening to us on the radio. And you know, we've been talking, you and I, just a little bit. Yesterday, I called you. I called you earlier in the week to say, Bill, it's raining down here. Now, for those of you listening, going, what's wrong with him? Did he hit his head? Because it wasn't raining everywhere, but where I was, it did rain. And in some of your reports, you've been before we go into the future here, and then kind of tell us what's happening. What's been since our last visit here on the radio? What has been? If things kind of transpired the way you kind of called them, you said we've had a wetter and a cooler than normal summer. Is that kind of right?
It certainly has for us. Now, there's so many things that you really have to take into consideration, but it kind of bothers me because here in Texas, we've had a cooler, wetter spring and entry into summer. Mm-hmm. So we turned hot, but we haven't been hot as long as we normally are. But when we got hot, we were above normal. Now the powers that be that would like it to be climate change or global warming, of course, they have touted the fact that NOAA, National Weather Service, had called July the hottest month, I think, ever. I'm not sure, except the one problem with that is they don't have records of ever.
Mm-hmm.
Our records, we didn't get that concerned about weather till I think it was like World War II. Now we've got a good long group of records, but they've been manipulated, they've been changed, and they're just not that 100% accurate. So we can say it's been a very hot July across the nation, but here in Texas, we got hot a little later, and I think we're getting ready to cool. So our hot spell really didn't last, if I'm right about the change, didn't last as long as we normally have a hot summer.
No, you're absolutely correct on that, but I tell you what, those few hot summer days that we have had, they were a doozy. I mean, it was, especially if you were out, and we've heard your, I don't want to say warnings because that's a term that the National Weather Service, but what you tell us is, take plenty of work and play breaks and check the back seat and check on one another and stay hydrated. I would listen to your program, so I'm did I get all the notes right, or did I leave things out?
Pretty much. Are you ready for me to editorialize here just a little bit?
Sure, go ahead, buddy.
Well, I had mentioned that, and this was my count as of 2 days ago, that there were 34 car deaths, children in the back seat, and 5 of those deaths were in Texas. And I had it in my head that, and this was just a random thought because everybody's been talking about the recent shootings that we've had in Ohio and also in El Paso, and I think about 30 people died. And my thought was this, and it sounds a little grim. I thought, well, I think I would rather be shot than cooked in the backseat of a car. And I thought, we have everybody making so much about the guns and the shooting, and what about these little kids cooked in the backseat of a car? And it behooves me, is beyond me, how you can forget you've got children in the back seat. I guess if you're distracted or not used to having them back there or something like that. But, nobody's calling for background checks to become a parent, and nobody's checking on the mental state of those people that become a parent. And so then I started looking up deaths. I looked up children's deaths. And we had estimated 1,720 kids killed in 2017 by abuse or neglect. So then I thought, well, how many are gun deaths do we have? So I looked that up, and we have had a lot of handgun homicides, but most of them were by pistol. And, everybody is ranting and raving about the long guns. Well, there were only 694 deaths by rifle, and all the rest were by handguns. And then I was surprised to find out that in 2016, rifles killed 374 people. Knives and cutting instruments killed 1,604 people. So I thought, what happens is people die in cruel ways, and they die all the time. But the politicians lock in on what's newsy and what the news makes of everything, and that's the shooting deaths by the long gun or the black rifle or the AR. And the AR is, of course, named after the company that actually designed it. But anyway, I said, well, I'll take a quick look at motor vehicle accidents, 40,327. Okay, that's my editorial. Wait a minute. That's my editorial. You say the word for me.
I don't know what you're talking
about. Anyway, I wanted people to be aware of real facts. I got my statistics. I looked them up from the FBI reports and things like that. But I thought, what our politicians should do is just try to make this stronger, more economically sound, good country. And maybe we wouldn't have so many deaths because, of all those gun deaths, 60% of them were suicides. So they're not addressing a real problem. What they're doing is making hay of some terrible incidents. And they're not looking at the overall picture. And they do that on weather all the time. They'll pick out the things they want you to be afraid of or make you think big things are changing, and they do it for the attention getting and not for the reality of solving a problem. And they're probably all still running around shaving with plastic razors and shopping with plastic bags and flying all over the country in planes that are adding to our atmospheric problem. So I think we need to get realistic about what we're talking about.
You bring up a bunch of points, and that's some food for thought for a lot of people, especially when there are in going back in media and and it's putting the angle or whichever your side or whatever on it. But sometimes going back like on the weather, where you and I had talked about, and there's been many situations where personally we had. I remember just a few years ago with the wildfires in Bastrop. I think we're coming up on or close to the anniversary of that.
Right, we sure are.
And with that, there was so much misinformation getting out. Where, for example, another organization was in the area saying, "Hey, they're evacuating this community in the county," and I tried to stay out of other folks' business, but I had sent a message and I went, "Hey guys, hold up just a minute. They're not evacuating that town. There's a deputy out there that's knocking on the doors, just telling people, hey, there's a fire up north of town. Get your, be prepared just in case something happens. We don't get it under control and it starts heading this way. That way you're prepared." But that goes just to get more, putting stories out like that is sometimes bad information, because what happens when you have, let's say, an individual who may need some special care, whether they're on a oxygen machine or need assistance leaving the house, and maybe their caregiver is out there with them, and let's say, for instance, that the battery died on the truck or whatever the case may be. You're going to create unnecessary panic, and it's all to just get a few Facebook likes, and that's
kind of like saying severe, severe, severe every time we get a thunderstorm.
Well, one thing that I had learned from you was when we talk about severe weather, anything is severe if you're right underneath it, especially if you're out there and there's a garden variety shower and you're having to be the one underneath that cloud and get hit by lightning. That's going to be severe to you. But
exactly right. And two, one thing I've always tried to point out to people when we're talking about, I try to give the criteria. Now, the National Weather Service changed it a little bit, the criteria for severe, and mainly the criteria was issued so that weather people who were in charge of making forecasts and issuing watches and warnings, at that criteria level, we became aware that you very easily could get damaging conditions, whereas the initial warning criteria is not necessarily damaging because that criteria has always been hail 3/4 inch or greater, and I always point out, hey, that's a dime-size hail, and then winds greater than 58 miles per hour. Well, the one change came by National Weather Service where now they say hail 1 inch or greater, so they increased it by 1/4 inch hailstone, which makes it capable of doing a little more damage. So we've got that. But anyway, that's why I point that out. Plus, I point out that one thunderstorm has enough energy to provide the power for our country for approximately 20 minutes. I didn't figure that out myself, but I read that. And so there's so much power in a thunderstorm, and if one ever collapses on top of you or right around you, that cold air up in the top of that storm is heavy. So it's right down to Earth's surface and then spreads out. And there you get your outflow and you get your damaging winds. And so I always just want people to be prepared for thunderstorms and be indoors as much as possible, pick up loose objects around the yard, and have a plan in the event that it does go severe, and not scare everybody every time we've got an outbreak of storm. There are times when it's so obvious, that you do have to get the word out and make sure people are as safe as they can be. But I think good information and education means a whole lot more than coming on every time there's a storm in the area and hollering severe.
We come up on the anniversary. I was just looking at the calendar, and I know that over the years you and I have talked, and you said, I don't remember those anniversaries, but I know that we're coming up on a couple-of-year anniversary for Harvey hitting the Texas coast, and we've only had just, I guess, at the beginning of June, we were talking some disturbances out in the Gulf that I think it ended up turning into a little something. But it hit in the southern part of the United States over near, I think, Alabama, Georgia. I don't remember exactly now. But what do you see as far as the tropics are concerned in the next few weeks?
Well, they really look weak. And normally, whenever we get this time of year, we start to see a little more activity. And what I always watch when we're in a tropical season are the storms coming off the coast of Africa. Because usually we get a flow pattern from Africa into the Caribbean or in toward the eastern part of the U.S., and we watch those storms. We just haven't had any potent storms. They would get about the middle part of Atlantic, and then the shear would basically tear them apart. Well, what we have right now is National Weather Service is grabbing at everything. There's one little area of circulation that's up in the north-central Atlantic, and it's named Chantal. And so they get a sea name now. There's a little bit of a disturbance that's in the Bahamas, but it won't do anything. And so if we start getting these little surges of cool air down here, we may dampen out the tropics a little bit more. And back when the big scare was on, all the climate change people, that we were going to have more, bigger, badder hurricanes than ever before. And the one that we had last year that hit the Florida Panhandle, it was considered a category, I can't remember now, 3 or 4. But just this year, 1 year after it occurred, National Weather Service went back, reevaluated it, and estimated it to be 5 miles stronger than it was reported. So now it becomes the strongest storm ever to hit the Florida Panhandle. They changed everything a year after it occurred. And to me, I just think that is so insignificant. How can they estimate